My name is Ryan, and I want to know who actually were prehistoric people.
My name is Alan Mann. I'm professor of anthropology at Princeton University. And the question is, who were prehistoric people? And that's a wonderful question because we have an understanding and a knowledge of people who lived a very, very long time ago. And people like me who study these long ago ancestors of ours, we are very fascinated with these people because it's very much like trying to understand who your great-grandparents were or your great-great-grandparents were. It's like going to your grandparents' house and going in the attic and looking at all of these photographs of all of these strange-looking people with their strange clothes and wondering what their lives were like. Well, that's the same thing that we do when we study prehistoric people. But now we're thinking about the people who lived not 50 or 100 or 200 years ago, but people who lived 10,000, 100,000, even 2 or 3 million years ago. We know that we are the descendants of people who began living as we do perhaps 5 million years ago, perhaps 6 million years ago. Now, these very early people didn't look like us, and in many ways they didn't act like us. They probably didn't wear clothes, they probably didn't use fire. These very early ancestors probably didn't use any kinds of tools. But we know that they were our ancestors because, like us, they walked on their 2 legs. And we know from the bones, especially of their legs and their pelvis, that they were 2-legged. And that marks them as part of our ancestry. And that began about 5 million years ago, and they were living in Africa. And these prehistoric people began to spread into Africa, but they stayed in Africa a very long time. And we know that they lived in parts of East Africa, in parts of Central Africa, and parts of South Africa. And during the several million years that we know they lived only in Africa, they didn't change very much. They had brains that were very small in comparison to ours, and they were able to walk like us. About 2 million years ago, something really exciting happened, and we begin to find their bones with pieces of stone that were chipped to make sharp edges or points. And these we used, we think, to cut up animals and to dig for roots and tubers and to cut up hard-shelled seeds. And this was a remarkable development because when you look at us, you see that we're really pretty wimpy when it comes to natural features, like large cats, like lions that have claws and big canine teeth. But we don't have anything like that. So the development of tools with a sharp edge gave our ancestors something really very, very important to use in finding food and preparing food. And soon after that, our ancestors begin to move out of Africa. And now they look a little bit more like us. Their brains are a little bigger. They're still walking on 2 legs. They may or may not have been hairy. We don't know. We don't know what their skin color was, but because we began to appear in the tropics, we probably had dark skin color. And then after about 2 million years ago, we find these prehistoric people living in Asia, and then a little bit after that in Europe, and they begin to use more and more complex tools with sharper edges, and we begin to find them in environments and in climates that were very difficult, like in Ice Age Europe. And so we have a record of our ancestors, these prehistoric people, from perhaps 5 million years ago, and from then on up as they spread around the world as they were able to deal with the difficulties that they found in different parts of the world, whether it was in the ice ages or in the tropical forest or in the deserts. Our ancestors were able to really live in these places because they had tools, and those tools enabled them to deal with whatever came along. And so, over the course of time, our ancestors developed, and in perhaps one of the greatest changes that have ever occurred to our ancestors, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, in the Middle East, they began to domesticate grains, like first barley, and then wheat and rye, and then later they began to domesticate animals. And so the stage was set for the eventual appearance of the ways of life that we now follow.